and Stephanie inherited a huge role at Murray State in terms of leading their ed leadership program. So she is very influential and helpful in various projects all across the state with P12 and higher education. So I see Josh on here, and Josh is one of the authors, a chapter author of the book we had published last year. So I'm going to let Stephanie take off, and then I'm going to help with a couple of slides as we try to keep getting the word out on these resources to our fellow colleagues in Kentucky and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. As Dr. Wallace just said, this is a UPPI group. It's a very unique opportunity that many states do not have, in that it's like we're our own PLC across state universities in Kentucky. And we meet with KDE, and it's just a great way to stay on top of what's happening in the state and making sure we're staying current with what we need to be doing in the universities. And as a result, we've done a lot of things like publishing these 2 books, and we're working on the 3rd one about school safety. This one is about servant leadership that we're going to talk about today, and Dr. Wallace has done a lot of work with that, so I'm going to give him the opportunity in a moment to share about that. But just a little more about UPPI, this partnership story. As I said, it is like a PLC. We do learn and grow from one another across the state. We do make sure that our programs are aligned. We've gone through some quality measures work. We've seen each other's programs and shared some ideas on how we can improve. UPPI was formed in 2016 by a Wallace grant. That's how it began. And we've shared ideas, we've had these book opportunities, and hopefully we're making our programs stronger and helping to grow stronger principals for our schools. So you've heard about us already. And so Dr. Wallace, if you will, share some about servant leadership and your experience with this topic.
Thank you, Stephanie. So in my doctorate work at Regent University in Virginia Beach, Virginia, I guess we've all heard the phrase servant leadership, but we were really taken into a deep dive in what that looks like in self-leadership, one-to-one mentoring, team development, and organizational leadership. So that's the area that I have focused on since my doctorate work and coming into higher ed. When we decided to do this book on servant leadership, various members of our UPPI group that Stephanie just described jumped in and said they would contribute chapters. And then we reached out to some of our P12 folks. So Josh, who's with us today, was one of those who submitted a chapter on servant leadership. All of the chapters were very well done. So the book is basically a series of true stories with names changed about how principals and other school leaders actually model servant leadership. Some of these were pretty stressful situations. When the severe storms hit in Kentucky, winter before last, couple of chapters on those situations. An example that I remember that I share with my classes, one person submitted a chapter that the principal in the building realized, if I'm really going to get to know everybody the way I need to, because my schedule is so busy, my teacher schedules are so busy, and I don't know the students' names, so I'm going to go into the lunchroom and serve milk every day at the end of the lunch line. And that was how he was able to build relationships and stronger connections with students and staff. And there's a lot of stories. I think we have 20 some chapters, and a couple of an introduction chapter and closing thoughts. It's a short little book, but a really powerful read. And it spun off of a similar work we did on the PEACE standards the year before last. So Stephanie and I use these books in our classes, and there are some other folks who do that too. who are part of our group, but we're still trying to get the word out that we have, I mean, both books very well written and very pertinent to school leaders in Kentucky or other places. Stephanie asked me to talk about Robert Greenleaf's work back in the 70s. He started studying and writing and teaching about servant leadership. He worked for AT&T and jumped into this corporate model that there's a better way to work with people in the work setting. And his writings are well known. He's sort of known as the father of the modern day definition and practice of servant leadership. A lot of folks live servant leadership and probably don't even know they're doing it. But bottom line, if we're selfless, if we think less about ourselves and more about others, if we model that, if we are integrity driven, model doing the right thing at the right times for the right reasons, to borrow a quote from John Maxwell, it just changes the culture in our home, changes us personally. We're a better person because of having that attitude, and changes the organizations where we are a part of those organizations. So it is a lifestyle. A lot of folks think, well, you turn it on, turn it off. They're talking about people skills. Well, it's more than that. It is practicing emotional intelligence, how to read people and relate to people and sympathize with them and what to say appropriately and what not to say. But it goes to a deeper level in truly letting people know that we care for them. So if it's a classroom teacher, realizing I need to learn these kids' names as soon as possible, learn their hobbies, make sure that I connect with them more than just academics. I shared this in the earlier presentation this morning. It's just a huge piece. So that is sort of a quick summary of servant leadership. It is considered an emerging research discipline. A lot of research has been done on servant leadership in the last 20 years. Gonzaga University, Regent University, there's the writings of Ken Blanchard, the writings of Larry Spears, of course, the writings of Robert Greenleaf. Parker Palmer writes in this camp. A lot of authors that maybe don't necessarily put in their writing the phrase servant leadership too much, but they definitely are explaining what it should look like in the organizational setting, in the school setting, in the personal setting. So Greenleaf's writings have been mined out and prioritized by Larry Spears to these 10. So if in a school building, for example, everyone's on the same page and understanding these are the characteristics, this is what, if we can have this being modeled all over the building, the kids will practice it more. The school's culture of care will go to a higher level. The relationship piece will go to a higher level. And then some wonderful things can happen. If we get to this caring for others piece and thinking about others piece, then the sky's the limit in terms of how a school is going to achieve. And it's going to be a place that people want to be, right in the middle of what's going on, from volunteer parents to various other stakeholders, and certainly the kids and the staff. But you see listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment, building community. So in the earlier session this morning, I talked about core values. This looks like the type of core values that would come out of a work session in a school district or a school. If the school or school district is looking for more than just the usual core values that we state that we have as a school, this really drills down to, well, if we're going to be able to grow into those core values that we know are automatic, it's going to need to start with this inside out lifestyle in this building and for the people who are a part of this school community. Better listening. The research says none of us listen well across society as a general rule, partly because of social media and how our brains are literally rewired. It's hard to go 30 minutes like this without checking our text. I'm making myself do that. My phone's out of my way here, but it's hard to do that. And right on down, how do we have empathy with people? Do we even with people that we disagree with, maybe even with students that are really causing problems in our building, are we able to show them empathy? The awareness piece, are we aware of what other people are bringing to the table, how they're feeling, their ideas, their needs? That's a huge part of a principal's job, and classroom teachers almost automatically do this if they understand the calling they have to work with kids every day. Notice persuasion instead of controlling, having influence over people because of our ethics and our beliefs instead of bossing. Conceptualization, I worry about this one in schools because we have so much mandated that's passed down to us. So there might be a lot of teachers who would say, we've never really even had a meeting where we envision the school 3 years from now, 5 years from now. What does that look like? What should it look like? Foresight falls into that too. Stewardship, if we want our society to be better, we're going to hopefully instill in our students as they move on through the grades and eventually become young adults, that is a big part of having the privilege to live in this society, is that we give back, that we're unselfish people. And then you can see the last two, the commitment piece, and then building community. Any school is going to be more successful, more effective, if the people who are part of that school feel like it is a safe, caring community. Then, as I said earlier, the other things will fall into place if we are able to build a healthy community. That's true in our homes too, any part of our life.
All right, so thank you, Dr. Wallace. So we want to have some discussion. So think for just a moment, when you hear the word servant leadership, who is that person, that leader, that teacher, who is that individual who comes to mind? And when you think about that person, are there any of these traits that we talked about that really stand out to define that person? Or maybe you even have some different descriptors. So think about that person for just a moment, look through the traits, and then I would love to hear you share. When I think about servant leadership, the person that comes to mind is a teacher that used to be in our building, and she did have that deep commitment to others, that stewardship, and I would add just selfless. You know, it was like she was almost like a martyr. You know, to be able to just help people no matter the cost. So truly had a deep commitment there and just a real sense of selflessness. So, Josh, which of these traits really stand out to you, important to a servant leader?
Well, that's actually part of the chapter that I placed in the book, was my principal that came in. We came from a pretty devastating prior principal that was here, that was all about, me, this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do. But yet we're all going to do it all together. and of course that never works. But when she came in, she had the foresight to understand what had happened, to actually see the consequences of what had occurred, and knew ahead of time her goals and success of where she was wanting to go. And it wasn't just a commitment to herself to do it, but she had to persuade the others to commit to the goal as a school together. And that was the hardest and most difficult thing for her to do. And then me being left over from the last administration, I'm writing the tailcoats, praying that everything goes well. And I had to adapt a lot of what she had demonstrated. Just for me to be able to survive. And together now the school's in a better place it's ever been before.
All right. Renee or Dr. Wallace, would either of you like to share anything else about the traits and your ideal servant leader?
I put in the chat, Dr. Pearson, a professor in college that I had at Berea College in undergrad. He changed my career path. He had a passion for teaching and he cared for us as persons, not just his students in class. One of my all-time life heroes was Dr. Pearson.
Thanks. Renee?
And was he a professor at Berea College?
Yes, ma'am,
Are you a graduate of Berea College?
I am.
Do you know I worked for Berea College prior to coming to the Department of Education and lived in
Well,
Berea, my very favorite place in the world to live.
it is a wonderful college community, and my dad was a pastor, had just gone into full-time ministry. So when mom and dad found out about Berea, I started as the oldest, and then three of my sisters went to Berea also, and I have a cousin who went there. So what a small world, Renee. Glad you shared that.
Wow, what a small world, Doctor. Oh my goodness, Dr. Wallace.
course,
Wow.
I'm a couple decades younger than you probably, so I won't mention when I graduated. You were probably just a kid.
Oh my goodness. Well, thanks for the compliment, but I doubt that. Well, this was a wonderful session. And the good thing about recording the session is that so many more people will have the opportunity to hear about the resources and the books. And definitely in this time, we need servant leadership from our school leaders. And this is beautiful. Opportunities for learning, servant leadership, success stories, supporting principles, and then the most important thing, replicating the process.
So Renee, I do have a few more things to share.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
That's okay. So Josh, being part of the book, you know how it is set up. But if anyone is watching the recording, they may not know. So I will just share that, as Dr. Wallace has said, you know, we've shared servant leadership stories. And then our hope is that we can help support principals and make this a useful tool in schools and other organizations. So at the end of each chapter, we do have the questions for reflection. So that it does make for a conversational opportunity where people can learn and grow from one another. So you might do those in like roundtable discussions. And this is just one example. This is one excerpt from the book, Going and Driving the Extra Mile. So just real quickly, we'll share this story so you can kind of see how the books are lined. Before COVID and teacher shortages, Principal Jane saw a need and accepted the challenge. Funds were low, field trips often required students to pay their own transportation costs, and being in a high poverty school district, this was a real challenge. So believing in the importance of students receiving that real life learning experience, Jane decided she would get her CDL license and drive her own students to field trips. When Jane asked the Director of Transportation about pursuing her CDL license, he supported those efforts, but informed her that he may need her to drive other routes occasionally. She had served in that capacity a few times, and then when COVID hit, there was a bus driver shortage, and so she eventually actually accepted a bus route and declined pay for those services. She just felt that was an area where there was a school need, and it was her responsibility to step in and do what she needed. While taking on that leadership in the driver's seat of a bus, she learned a lot about the life of a bus driver. It's hard work. When you're subbing in the dark on routes you've never driven before, it can be a daunting task. And she believes that a lot of people have taken for granted how difficult that job can be, not to mention having a load of children that may or may sit in the seat and do what is asked of them. She says it is exhausting to do that and then come back to school and work all day as a principal. But her philosophy is no one ever said going the extra mile was easy, but it can also be highly rewarding. So Jane has reaped rewards by making those positive connections with students. She sometimes drives high school routes after finishing her elementary routes, and she said the students are no different regardless of their age. She says, just be nice to them and they will talk to you and do what is expected. She also realizes what a difference the first face they see in the morning can make. Developing those positive relationships both at the beginning and end of the school day can leave a lasting impact on students. So this was paraphrased. It was a shortened chapter, but it kind of got the main points of what that chapter was about. So she goes on and talks a little more about servant leadership. But then what we do at the end of the book is we have questions at the end of each chapter, we have questions for reflection. So first question, what are ways administrators can identify areas in which they can provide service to the school and community? So how do you find out what those school needs are? Number two, what are ways that sincere appreciation can be shown to students, staff, or the community? And then number three, how do administrators model and create the desire to serve others among their staff? So in this chapter, she felt like she was being a role model for others. This was an administrator that then also went through the tornadoes that we experienced last year. And, they opened up their school building to the whole community. And, no one hesitated to jump in and just help where needed. So, how do you model that as an administrator and instill in others that idea of being a servant leader? So we have just a few minutes if we could just talk again. How are ways in our schools we can do this? And or what are some ways that maybe this book could be used to help encourage those efforts? So Josh, if you don't mind sharing some ideas about servant leadership in the schools.
I hit the wrong button, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, and that's what I just put in the chat there, that this text and the books like it that's been put out by this, I keep several resources on my shelf in the office. And we've got several different staff that are going through leadership degrees right now. And those are the books that I tell them that if they need exceptions, if they need to look for stories, if they need relatable experiences, those are the resources they need to take. You get a lot of leadership books that tell you how to do a lot. But when you see it's the real life stories and you see the connections that it's made, that's when it becomes relatable and it sticks with them. And I think that's the best thing about them. And I think that's the book itself falls into the servant leadership category as being serving to others. And that's the resources that you rarely ever find.
Thank you so much for that, Josh. All right, Dr. Wallace, do you have anything to add?
Well, I appreciate Josh putting the book out to where it's being used in his school and school district. When we are writing these books as a UPPI team, that's what we hope, that we can tell real stories and then they can be taken back and channeled back into the school or the district. So Josh, thanks for doing that. I know Stephanie knows of a district. I know of a district. I'm sure there's more than a couple who have been using, they use the Peaceful book, and then I know of others who are using this this most recent book. I was just thinking to all of you, I messed up, Stephanie. I had an opportunity to have us plugged in at about 9 o'clock this morning. And I told Keith, I said, let's do that one at noon. So at noon, people take a break and have lunch before they come back and hear Mike Rutherford. So,
right.
But
yeah,
this
it's hard to compete with Mike Rutherford. It's one of my favorites. So
it is. I'm getting ready to go in and listen to him.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks Renee for being so professional and courteous to us. We appreciate that.
It was my pleasure to join this session. It's just amazing. And I will be seeking out both of these resources for our team at KDE. because we're with the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness. And I think it's just, this is an important resource to spread the word about.
Thank you.
All
That's
right, I'm going to
perfect.
stop the recording now. And I thank all of you for your time